His touch awoke me. "I just wanted to put the duvet back on you," he muttered, standing over me. I was only 10 at the time, so I didn't think much of the incident. But then his touches kept happening again and again. My brother was born a healthy, normal baby. I can only imagine the smiles on my parents' faces when they held him for the first time. It meant the world to them to have children they could be proud of. It was an important part of their culture, which may explain why, when my brother got sick a few months later, they did nothing. They chose to wait, hoping he'd get better on his own. But then his condition got so bad that he had a strong seizure, and finally, they got him to a hospital. The doctor said the seizure was so severe, it could have ended his life. His symptoms calmed down, and my parents took him home from the hospital thinking everything was better. But while my brother had survived, his sickness wasn't improving. He had multiple seizures a day for the next 5 years. My parents downplayed it, hoping it was something he'd grow out of. But that's all it was. Hope. My brother's condition started to take a toll on his mental health as well. As the years went on, he had a harder and harder time learning, and he fell further and further behind in school. The report cards would come in, but my parents simply didn't accept that he was struggling. Instead of putting him in special needs classes, they just pushed him harder to do better. Soon, that pushing turned physical. My dad would use his belt against him for a bad grade and make him stay up all night to study when he couldn't even read or write. At 15, he dropped out of school and never went back. Of course, being a 15-year-old also meant something else: puberty. To my parents, his new physical desire was a good thing. It was a sign he was normal. They even encouraged it, giving him access to adult videos. As if the thought of your own brother watching that wasn't disturbing enough, he started doing it in front of me and my sister. There were 6 of us in a tiny house that consisted of a kitchen, bathroom, and a room that served as both a living room and a bedroom for all 4 kids. So basically, we had 0 privacy. During the daytime, we were all usually at school, so my brother would have the whole house to himself. But one day, I happened to be home taking my after-school nap. I woke up, feeling his hands in my pants. I was frozen in shock. I was only 10 at the time, so I didn't think much of the incident. But then it happened again and again. And it became clear what my brother was doing to me. I decided I had to tell my father. "Dad, you have to do something!" I was shaking. "Come on, you're being way too dramatic," he said. "Boys his age watch that kind of stuff. It's perfectly normal." I wanted to tell him about the touching. I really did. But my dad used to sock him every chance he could get, and as mad as I was at my brother, I didn't want to see him hurt. I told myself I could handle it on my own. I could stay awake during the day, and I did. The touching stopped. At least, for me. Years later, I found out that when he stopped touching me, he started touching my little sister. I couldn't believe how long it had been going on without me knowing it. It turns out that even though my brother had difficulty learning, he had figured out one thing. If he was going to continue his deviant behavior, he needed to be more careful. So he collected blackmail to use against my sister. Bad report cards, her diary, other childish things you'd never want your mom to see. Once he had his ammo, he'd ask my sister to touch him in exchange for silence. Finally, she decided she'd had enough and told my parents. And like I feared, they punished him the only way they knew how. My mom and dad had never come to terms with my brother's disability. In fact, ever since he dropped out of school, they had pretty much abandoned him. They didn't want him out in the community because they believed he brought disgrace to our family. So instead of helping him find his potential, they shielded him from the outside world. Or, more accurately, shielded them from him. My brother had nothing to occupy his mind, to keep his hands busy. So while my parents were hoping he turned into a son they could be proud of, they were inadvertently allowing him to turn into a predator. After the incident with my sister, my brother's behavior changed, but not for the better. In our family's culture, laying hands on women is judged with extreme disdain. So he started preying young boys in the neighborhood. Every time my parents found out about it, he'd manage to talk his way out of it. No one was willing to file a report because they didn't want to risk the shame of people knowing what a mentally challenged boy had done to their son. Then one day, my brother's behavior finally caught up with him. He was arrested for doing it on a minor in a public parking lot. He was 25 by this point. He'd been sexually abusing people for a decade. Despite his age, the court recognized his mental development was that of a much younger person, so he was sent to a special unit. His time there was short, but it was still hard for my parents to accept it. They finally realized that if my brother was ever going to change, he'd need their help doing it. He needed to be steered towards something positive and healthy, so they enrolled him in an art school to learn crafts. Predictably, he had a hard time keeping up with the others and started to lose interest. But then he found happiness in an unexpected place, barber school. Before long, he was working as a barber's assistant. A colleague he befriended even introduced him to a girl who had a similar story to my brother's. They've now been together for years and even have their own place. I'm happy to report that my brother finally has someone who understands what he's been through and will give him the support he needs. Make no mistake, my brother went down a bad path, and many lives were adversely affected, including my own. But I can't help but wonder, did it have to be this way? From a young age, not only was my brother's own body failing him, but so were the people whose job it was to support him, to give him a chance. No matter what kind of challenges a person with a disability is faced with, they should have a place in society. With proper guidance, what would my brother's story have been?